Welcome back. This is part 2 of the Great T-Shirt Crochet Experiment. Great Crochet T-Shirt Experience. Experiment. Yeah, that. I am really getting super excited about this project. I have come up with this concept that I want to crochet the exact same pattern utilizing different types of yarn. So they're all going to be the same weight, but I'm going to crochet them with different fabrics, like might be wool, might be cotton, might be, I don't know, who knows, and then different color patterns just to kind of experiment and see how some of these things turn out. That's what I'm really excited about. Now, if you saw the last video, which I'll link up here the entire playlist for the Great Crochet T-Shirt Experiment. And if you saw the last video, you saw me shopping for different patterns and kind of going through that process of figuring out which pattern I wanted to use. Now, I've narrowed it down to 2. And with those 2, I'm going to probably work up each one of them. At least I'll work up the one that I think is most likely, and if that works, then I'll just go with it. But if that one I'm like kind of on the fence about, then I might work up the second one and then kind of see which one I think is going to work better for this project. So the next step, what I'm going to do today is to find the yarn that I want to use for that. And if I have it in stock, then I might start the gauge swatch. We'll kind of see. We'll see what it is. I'm not sure if I'm going to have the yarn that I want to use in stock, but we'll find out. So the first step here is going to be to download these patterns, which I've actually already done, and then take a look at them to see how much of each yarn is used and what type of yarn. And don't worry, I'm not going to show you the entire pattern. I'm just going to kind of show you the first page so that we can talk about some of those things that I need to in order to select the right yarn. Now, I can see up here under materials that she's using a fingering weight, which is what I wanted, and it's between 300 and 1600 yards. Okay, so like seriously, how much am I gonna need? Well, this is where we're gonna go down to the sizing. And you can see her sizing down here. Sometimes they'll go into a little bit more detail on sizing, such as, they'll kind of give you a whole chart and different things like that. She's not doing that here. She does say in the notes that the finished garment has 2 to 3 inches of positive ease. Now, this certainly is not a tutorial on how to select the right size garment for you. I'm just going to say that I know that 99 times out of 100, the large is going to be the right size for me. I've done enough garments now that it's very rare that I go off of that. Even when I try, it's like, I should have done the large. So I'm going to stick with the large, which means I need 1,350 yards. Now, this is obviously an approximation. My tension might be slightly different than hers. The yarn that I use might be slightly different. All of those kind of things might vary the amount of yardage that I need. But one of my goals for this first project is to match the yarn as closely as I possibly can to what she used. Now, you don't always have to go exactly with the yarn that the designer used, but it's going to help a lot of things. One is the drape is going to be very similar if you use the same type of yarn. If you're not using the same type of yarn, you want to use something that's comparable. And there's tools, and I'll kind of show you in a minute, that you can kind of figure out what might be comparable. But to get the most similar results to what the designer got, stick with the kind of yarn that the designer used. So let's go back and look at what she used. Okay, we can see here that she used on this particular red one the Stroll Tonal in Heartfelt. So I know that Stroll is a Knit Picks yarn, and I've actually used Stroll a couple of different times. I used a Stroll hand painted, which tonal versus hand painted versus solid, it's just how it's dyed. Nothing else changes on that. So the Stroll I've used on two different projects. I like the way it works up. It's not the softest yarn around, but it's not so scratchy that I can't use it. It's just fine. And once it kind of washes with a little bit of fabric softener, it works up very soft. It's very washable, which is an important thing for me. I like to have garments that I can actually throw in the washer and dryer and not worry about them. So that is a really good first option for me. So what I'm going to do now that I know that it's the Stroll, I'm going to go over here to my yarn stash. And if you're not familiar with how I track my yarn stash, I'll also link to a video right there on how I use Notion for my yarn stash. You could totally use Ravelry, and that works just fine as well. And I think I give you some tips in that video, if I'm right, on how to use Ravelry as well. I use Notion. It works great for me. And so I'm going to go over here by weight. And we're going to see, here's my fingering category. Now, I want this to be sorted, it already is, by yards available. So I'm going to see right here is that Stroll hand painted. That's a really good option. So let me go pick that up and we'll kind of take a look at it and evaluate it. Okay, so here is the Stroll hand painted. This was a project that I finished and it was huge. This is one of the few cases where I actually needed to go down to a medium. Was way too big for me. So I went ahead and frogged the entire thing. I was going to use this to remake that project. So I'm not sure yet whether or not I want to go ahead and use this for this new t-shirt. Because the other thing is I was really hoping to use something that was a solid color. So let's keep browsing and we'll make that decision. Now I also have this chroma fingering, and this is stunning. I have this in both this kind of a sunsetty kind of colorway. At least it's called Lava Party, but here in Phoenix, I think it's more of a sunset. And I have it in these blues and grays. I definitely think I want to use this for one of the shirts that I make, but not for this first one because I need to see how the overall pattern works up first, and then I can kind of decide whether or not that's going to work. What else do I have? Oh, I have this Hobie Cotton Kings, but this only gives me 1,100 yards. That's not going to be quite enough. So we're going to pass on that one, even probably for a future shirt on this one because it's just not enough. I also have this gloss fingering, and while I only have 880 yards of the gray, I also have 660 yards of the raspberry, and I think I might use that for a future one also as kind of a striped pattern and see how the stripes work out. Here's that Stroll fingering. I'm actually using those for another top, and I've already cut them up a little bit because of the way the pattern works, so I don't think I want to use them for that. And nothing else. Oh, I do have these cottons. And again, these cottons are going to be a nice option because I can put them together. They're all the same. Like these are the Cotton Kings, and then, oops, glitchy. I also have some other cottons, but not the same color. So let's kind of keep those on hold, and I may use those as a test project as well. So right now, my best option is the Stroll hand painted. It's not a solid color, but as far as what I have in my stock, it would work just fine. She used a printed kind of pattern, so while it isn't solid, I think it would work up just fine. I know it would look decent in that pattern. I've actually seen it worked up, so I know what it turns out looking like, and it is actually very pretty. So let me consider that one. But before I make that decision, I want to see the other pattern and see what yarn that has, and maybe that'll swing my vote. So this other pattern is we'll scroll up here, the Mystical Tea by Hannah Cross. And, this one, the Tried and True, is by Two Brothers Blankets, in case you want to know. This one's the Mystical Tea. And this uses a twill fingering by We Crochet, who's also Knit Picks, so it's kind of one in the same company. They just branded their names different, so for those crocheters versus knitters, you can go back and forth. This one is 100% fine superwashed merino, whereas the Stroll is 75% superwash merino and 25% nylon. So it's a little bit sturdier overall, but not a bad thing. In fact, if I scroll down here, pictures, it shows that one of the yarn alternatives is this Stroll fingering, or you could use a comfy fingering, which is 75% cotton, 25% acrylic, or Stylecraft, which is 100% acrylic. So she gives some alternative yarn options, which I love it when they do that. If they don't do that, there's a fabulous tool called yarnsub.com. And I've talked about this a little bit, but really quick, you could go in here and type in Stroll and pick your yarn, and you can see Stroll comes in socks, solids, heathers, twists. These are mostly just different colorways. But then if I go down here, it gives me options for different types of yarn that might work together. Now, some of the things that you want to look for when you're looking at these, this 99% match, if you read the information, the texture of this yarn is also applied. The yarn is also a sock yarn, and sock yarn, just FYI, means 75% wool, 25% nylon or polyamide, yes, that one. So that it's a little bit sturdier. The yarn is also made from machine washable wool. The fiber content matches exactly. The qualities of this yarn are a very close match. Some other things that it might say is that the gauge is the same. Those kind of things. Things that you don't really care about are the size of the balls and the colors that they come in. That doesn't really matter as far as the outcome of your project. So I don't care if it doesn't match on those kind of criteria. So those are the things that I'm going to look for and say, well, any of these options are going to be a good secondary choice if the particular designer did not give me some options. So I certainly could look through these real quick and say, do I have any of these in my stock? And right now, the one thing I don't love about this site is that they tend to favor, I think it's not a US based site, because a lot of the yarns seem to come from other countries and kind of European countries. So, you'll see a lot of the names are not familiar to us because they're not yarns that we see in Hobby Lobby or Michael's or Joann's. So if you're looking for those kind of yarns, you're not going to see too many of them. You're going to see these German names. You're going to see some Italian names and, just all kinds of different types of yarns. That's my only complaint with this. However, I can say, you know what? I have some of this yarn. I wonder if it would go as a comparable. So I can come up here and say, let's search for, I have some Valley yarns. You know what? Let's do Heritage. I'm trying to come up with one that I know off the top of my head. And this is Cascade Heritage. So I can see that this is a fine weight super merino nylon. So we're good on that. And then I can say, let's see which ones work similarly to it. And that gives me the criteria if I want to say, I have this yarn. Does that meet the criteria? Does that match it? So that sometimes helps a little bit. This system is not perfect, but it gives me a little bit of extra bit of research. And I love doing research. Not everybody does. I do. So, all right. Going back here to the twill fingering, I'm going to check out my size over here to see how much I need. And you can see her sizing is a little bit different. It says to fit chest size. And I, of course, do inches. So I'm definitely bigger than a 38, not quite a 42. So I always tend to go with the large. 8 balls of the twill fingering. But what I really want to pay attention to is the 1,430 yards. I do not have this twill fingering. If we kind of go up here and take a look at that yarn, at We Crochet, here's kind of what it looks like. You have some different color options. It's $13.99. $13.99 is a little bit more than I want to spend when I have to buy eight skeins of it. That's kind of on the pricey end for what I want to spend for this particular project. Maybe if it were on sale, I would take advantage of that. But for now, and I love this rose heather color would be beautiful for that top, I think. Right now I'm going to pass on the twill fingering. It's just a little bit out of the budget that I have for this particular project. So I could look at these other ones that she had highlighted and say, okay, I've got the stroll fingering. Certainly this would work for that. I don't have any comfy fingering, but again, I really want to kind of stay with the same makeup of what she did. And so that's what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick with this so I don't have to buy any. And I'm going to go with the tried and true. Tied and true, not tried and true, tied and true. Okay, so I'm going to make the tied and true using the stroll fingering, hand painted. This is the colorway Sangria. My next step, since I already have the yarn in stock, is to do that gauge swatch. So let's kind of move over and work on that together. Now you can see that her gauge is a 4-inch square, 18 herringbone double crochets by 13 rows. Now I need to refresh my memory on how to do a herringbone double crochet. I've done them before for a top and it's a lovely, lovely stitch. I absolutely love it. But I'm going to pause right here and I'm going to go check that out real quick and then I'll be back with you. Okay, so I'm back and I have reviewed how she does the herringbone double crochet. I always like to review if the designer has a specific video on that because I found that some designers do their stitches slightly different than other designers. And in order to get the same sort of gauge and all of that kind of good stuff, I find it's much more beneficial to review exactly how they did it. So now that I have that, we can see that she does 18 herringbone double crochets by 13 rows. So let me work up that gauge swatch and I'll get back to you. Okay, so one thing that I remembered as I worked with this yarn is it's pretty dark, so I needed to get my extra light to see. Yes. In knitting, they say that you cannot work with yarn that has been frogged without kind of giving it a soak first to get all of the kinks out of it. Now, I generally haven't found that to be an issue with crochet, but it's definitely makes it a little bit inchier. It makes it a little bit interesting to crochet with, simply because it kind of kinks up back here, and the kinks sort of ball together and clench each other. But I don't think it affects the stitches at all. It just sort of affects the ability to work with it at a maybe slightly quicker pace. So that's just an interesting side note that I thought you might like to hear.
A few inches later.
Okay, I have done 14 rows and I think about 22 half double crochets. I'm going to take this off so it's not like blinding you at the moment. And now I am going to measure this to see how it comes out. I did more rows and more double crochets, half double herringbone double crochets, because sometimes if you do the exact number, your measurements can be a little bit off. So I've sort of learned over time to do a little bit more and then just kind of see how it fits and count the number of rows and stitches and all that kind of good stuff. So let's give this a shot. Okay, you can sort of see that over there. Let me get my gauge measure. This is the one that my son made for me. He 3D printed it, and on the back it says, crochet is not just a craft, it's therapy for the soul. So he actually printed a special little message for me on the back. I think it's adorable. Now, if I place this over the sample, it's definitely wide and tall enough, which is what we want because we did more. So I'm going to kind of reverse that and say, all right, how are we doing here? It looks like I am about one row over, which is what I need to be. One row more, and then I'm going to count the number of stitches to see how many stitches I have across. And I'm going to get my hook to do this because it's just a little bit easier. I'm going to count that again because counting, not my strong point. So we'll count it again. I got 18, which is what I want, but I want to just double check that. And I'm going to get my light to see a little bit better here. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. Okay, so I got 17 that time. So I'm really, really close. And I think the decision that I'm going to make is I'm going to start this pattern using this yarn. And as I sort of get into doing the pattern a little bit, I'm going to measure again after doing a few rows to make sure that I'm still staying where I need to be as far as gauge goes. But it's looking pretty darn close. I mean, I don't think I've ever gotten that close to gauge before, so fingers crossed everything works out the way it needs to. And part of that might be because I've also never used the yarn that the pattern designer recommended. Because I've just used whatever I liked or whatever was on hand and didn't necessarily want to go out and buy yarn specific to what the designer recommended. So I've just sort of gone with what what was there. However, since this is the actual yarn that she used and the crochet hook size she used, everything seems to be really, really close. We'll go ahead and get started on this, and I will let you know how things are progressing. I'll do a checkup now and then, and we'll just see how things go. And if you'd like to join me on this, I will make sure to put the patterns, all of the information in the comments below. That way, if you'd like to join me, do a little bit of a crochet along with me, it's all good. I'd love to have you. Just report back your results and we'll see how things go. Thanks so much. Make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so then the next update that I do on this pattern, you don't miss it.